Thank you. Uh, Thank you for that presentation. Very few people are able to do the economics together with the maritime security, together with the bilateral diplomatic history, all put together. People are normally experts in one, so you have managed to try to put everything together. So that gives me the opportunity now to move on to the floor. You take some questions. You quickly identify yourself. Try to keep your comments, questions short, so we can have as many questions as possible. So maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions in a row, and then we'll move on from there. Questions? Surya?
Yeah, Surya, because as you might have read in the Hindu, I broke the story about the civil nuclear deal negotiations in commencement.
Yes, I must admit, the Hindu is a newspaper I have grown up with. My father, I am from the northeastern city of Guwahati, and in Guwahati, the Hindu newspaper that comes a day late. But my father still made it a point for me to read the Hindu every day.
Anyway, that's about blowing my trumpet. The
Okay.
point is, the question is,
Yeah.
what makes you so confident that the civil nuclear deal will be signed
Okay.
eventually? I think I'll leave it at that. We can have
Okay.
next round.
Another Rajiv?
At the end of your presentation, you mentioned that maritime cooperation between India and Japan should be priority because of Chinese initiative of MSR. What is the idea behind that? Can you elaborate on that? And second point I wanted to know, during your presentation you talked about India-US, India-China, problems between these two countries. But how India's relations with US or China affects India-Japan relation in a positive way or negative way? Because China and Japan have also similar issues of assertiveness and territorial disputes. So can you elaborate on that as well?
Thank you. Question from the gentleman in here.
Yeah, it's okay.
Could you kindly please identify yourself, please, sir?
Sorry?
Could you kindly identify yourself just
Yeah,
for the
my
record?
name is Omkar Shrestha. I am Associate Research Fellow with ICS and also adjunct faculty in NUS. Thank you, Dr. Bora. You were not saying cherry blossom. Just a small, cherry blossom is beautiful, but also very short lasting. Whereas chrysanthemum is long lasting.
Okay.
So let's hope that that will be the one. But my query is, when India looks for lookish policy, how would India's look is within the country?
Okay.
Because Northeast is the weakest link. What is the government's policy priority on that over the past several years?
I
Thank you.
think you got quite a bit, so maybe you can answer this round and then.
Thank you for the questions. I'll start by answering the question on the civilian nuclear deal. So what makes me confident is that there are other overriding factors, I think, that will make both Japan and India override the domestic opposition in each other's countries. Because you see, as can be seen from the visit of the Japanese Emperor and Empress, it is very rare for the Japanese Emperor and Empress to make visits outside to countries which are not monarchies. But last year they visited India during the end. No, it was the end of, I think, 2013. I think that the reason is the bigger picture that both Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Modi have in mind. That this is seen as what is seen in both the countries as the biggest stumbling block in the relation, and the fact that both of them, as I highlighted during my lecture, this is the right time for them to do it because they enjoy super majorities in their own respective parliaments, and this will not last forever, because you see, even in India, after this budget comes into place in February 28th this year, there will be questions being asked, and there are other state elections. At present, the BJP is doing well in all these state elections also, but then this may not last forever. So this is the right time for them, I think, to strike the iron when it is hot. And also, as I said, there are bigger issues at stake which will propel them, make them sign the deal, hopefully by this year. and the fact that the Japanese would also like to get into the Indian nuclear market, and then to show their interest and to show that they are also eager for a part of the Indian nuclear pie. So this is what makes me confident, but as it's very difficult to make predictions in China. So let's wait and see what happens later this year. Maybe during the annual summit of the Prime Ministers, some decision could be expected, and Shinzo Abe would be visiting India later this year. So hopefully that deal can be signed within then. Because, and another thing that makes me positive is that the wordings in the joint statement says progress is being achieved towards the signing. The joint statements are also always very carefully worded. So from reading and from whatever I understand of English, I think that it is going in a positive direction. But as I said, as you understand, it's if India is the elephant, Japan is yes. The decisions are equally difficult in Japan as well. So thank you for your question, Rajiv, who's an old friend of mine from my JNU days. Good to see you here. Anyway, so about the maritime MSR, the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, I think China has really, I think it is a major, what should I say? It's a very well thought out initiative of China to set out the Maritime Silk Road the initiative, and to involve countries like Maldives, Sri Lanka in the Maritime Silk Road initiative. China is, I think, hitting India where it hurts, right in its backyard. So I think in order to counter that, it is very important for countries like India and Japan to collaborate in the maritime security front, not only because of the China factor, but in order to ensure that their economic, that the importance attached, their importance in the Indian Ocean region, India's importance in the Indian Ocean region is not diminished. Because now with the setting up, what has happened with the setting up of the Hambantota port, the ships from coming to Southeast Asia and East Asia, from say Africa, West Asia, they can bypass the Indian waters. So this is, and China is also setting up another big port of Colombo. So I think for India to regain its importance in the Indian Ocean region, it is very important for India and Japan to collaborate. And as I said, Japan is also wants India's importance, because India's collaboration, because Japan has a port to supply in Djibouti. So I think it's a mutual gain. It's a win-win situation for both of them. Yes, and Rajiv, you also asked the question about how does India's relations with China and the US affect Japan-India relations. More so in the case of US, because you see, Japan, as you know, is a steadfast American ally. And it helps that the kind of military hardware that India is buying, for example, P-3C Orion surveillance aircraft. So Japan also has P-3C Orion, US also has P-3C Orion. So you see the interoperability between India and Japan and the United States, the armed forces has increased in the recent years. And the second thing is, as you can see from the trilateral dialogue, Japan, India and the US also have a trilateral dialogue. Such a thing would not have been possible, say, maybe 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago. So the thing is, India was wary of working with US. India would work with countries on a bilateral level, but was wary of getting into multilateral engagements. But now this is not the case. With relation to China, you see, yes, China's relations with Japan are even worse than that with India. So you see, there's not to suggest that because China's relations are bad with both Japan and India should come together. But the fact remains that, as I said, on the trading front also, Japan also wants to park its money elsewhere. India would also like to widen its trade basket. So it's a case of, after all, economics. So as I said, economics will also dictate that both Japan and India, they cooperate in the economic realm, because at present I think both Japan and India depend too much on China, and putting all your eggs in one basket is never a very good idea. Then with regards to your question on India's Look-East policy, yes, first a disclaimer, I come from the Look-East, from the northeastern region, from Assam. But what India has realized is that I think the Look-East, instead of being a burden, can be a bridge to Southeast Asia. So from that time onwards, when the realization has finally dawned, realization always dawns late in India. And it's like Indian movies when the police comes after all the firing, all the action takes place. So after the Indians' Lookie's policy was enunciated, then the policy makers have realized the importance of the Northeast to help link it up with Southeast Asia. But then, as I said, the progress has been very slow. Although the intentions are laudable, the intention has not been matched by action. Although there is talk of linking the Northeast to Myanmar, the trilateral highway, the work construction has started, but construction is far more speedier on the other side of the border than in India. There is also this collaboration with Myanmar called the Kaladan Multimodal Transport Project, which is going on. So I think it is the Northeast is at least from what I understand is being seen as a kind of a bridge which can help India reach out to Southeast Asia, because as I pointed out, India cannot build bridges on the north because the Chinese would not allow. No, not the actual bridge. India cannot bridges on the west because Pakistan has other ideas. But on the east, yes, the Southeast Asian nations are welcoming. So that is the difference that India has in the northeast as compared to the north and the west. So I think it will take time before we see actual progress on the ground, but at least the beginning has been made. And the fact that in most of the northeastern states, of course, we see occasional bouts of violence, but the fact that the violence levels have come down in most of the northeastern states, that is added to the fact. And also another fact is that from my personal experience, I can say that most of the educated young people from the northeastern part of India have now migrated and settled down in other parts of India, which is not the case with our previous generation. So frankly speaking, that makes a much more it's very that makes it, they have become so well integrated with the rest of India that the issues of insurgency, they will die their own natural death. Now there are more like it's more like the groups that are running in Northeast are more like Abu Sayyaf. So it's like kidnapping, extortion. They are more like Abu Sayyaf kind of groups. These are not fighting ideological battles. And even the longest running insurgency in India, in Nagaland, the government has signed ceasefire. So that has helped them to improve. And you see the trust that has been imposed on Northeast, even in the Modi government. You see an MP from Arunachal, Kiren Rijiju, is now the Minister of State for Home in India. So the Minister of State is Minister of Home Affairs Minister Rajnath Singh. MOS for Home is Kiren Rijiju from MP, from Arunachal Pradesh. So this shows the trust being reposed on Northeasterners. But I just wonder, because China has claims over Arunachal. China says that Arunachal is a part of China. So I was just wondering if Kiren Rijiju accompanies Prime Minister Modi on a trip to Beijing. So that will put I think he should accompany, because that will put Beijing in a major diplomatic back foot. So I don't know whether he has this idea, because if you were to say that he is an Indian citizen, then it will be difficult for Modi to go. If he gives Rijiju a visa, then it means that you accept that Arunachal is a part of India. I think Modi should use this strategy. It's so you see that things are improving. Although, as I said, it will be time before we see actual progress on the ground. Yes.
Oh, you should have made him MOS for external affairs.
Yeah, that would make an even more complicated situation. Yes.
Johnson and then Hassan. Johnson first.
My question pertains to the pace at which the Japanese have been moving in India. It is dismally slow,
Yeah.
as far as business is concerned. So this cherry blossom they're talking about, what time factor, are we really referring to? Because at least in the business side of things, the Japanese are not so keen to invest. And in fact, there is a dissonance in terms of culture too, because the Japanese traditionally have not been too comfortable working with the Hindu pace of things, So how do you reconcile this? So that's one question. Two, how much of intellectual and strategic depth does India have in understanding Japan? Are there think tanks and are there sufficient experts who understand Japan? Or is it just a Modi wave, which is only between Modi and Abe and nobody else is part of that, change process?
Okay.
Sir?
Yeah, I'm Adrian Villanova at your consultancy. I think loud enough. Yeah, but I'm also part Japanese. Singaporean part. I think that very good presentation, I must say.
Thank you.
Joe's strategic considerations. Now, economically first, is that it appears that India is placing a lot of emphasis on this nuclear help from Japan. But we ever thought that the Japanese are having their own problems, the domestic problems, they are not wanting it, and Abe has got to overcome that.
Yeah,
That's
yes.
one. Number two, where the defense is concerned, I don't understand India in the sense that you have got this maritime you have the Srivijaya.
Okay.
You are doing it around Southeast Asia.
Yes.
And the problem is that you are closely linked with Japan in defense, but you are not very close with ASEAN countries. Economically, of course, Singapore has an advantage. But the other ASEAN countries, I think, should not be ruled out in the sense that we cannot only think in terms of Japan.
Yeah.
That's my comment.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Hansen, for your question. Yes, I think the cherry blossom time that I'm referring to is during the prime ministerships of Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Modi. I think because this is the right time, I think, for them to take the hard decisions. Because even if he wanted, Dr. Singh could not have taken these decisions because of a lack of a majority in the Indian Parliament. And coalition dharma means that you have to heed the opinions of coalition partners. But then this is not the case with Prime Minister Modi or with Prime Minister Abe. So this is what the cherry blossom time is during the prime ministerships of Modi and Abe in India and Japan respectively. And yes, Japanese are not happy, as I said in the second slide. In this slide, I have said that. Can you just go back to this slide? Yeah, there are hiccups in the execution of some key projects. Yes, of course, from my interaction with Japanese scholars, people in the Japanese government also, they are very unhappy with the execution of some key projects like the dedicated freight corridor, the DMIC, the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the Chennai-Bengaluru Industrial Corridor. So they are very displeased. Yes, hiccups would be a far more presentable word. So they are very displeased with this. But the fact that they have already committed these investments, and now what Modi has done is that he has set up a special cell for Japan-related things in the Prime Minister's office. So things like this can help speeden up the things. And this is the change I expect from the Prime Minister Modi because of his personal interest and contacts with Japan also. Because as I said, during the time he was banished from other world capitals, Japan and even Beijing for that matter welcomed him. So that he has not forgotten. So I think that thing would be key. And now we see, and another thing, recently the government issued an ordinance for land acquisition, again which is very controversial in India. Now the government, if required, can acquire land for what they say are public interest things. For example, there is a big steel plant in Odisha called POSCO deal has been scuppered because of the land acquisition process. So it's not only with the case with Japan, and the environmental clearance also was a big issue. So with the land ordinance come in, which has already become a law now, with the signing, So I think things will improve on that economic investment front. And as you are very right in saying that, yes, they're very displeased with it, and they're also displeased with other things, for example, which Indians do not think of. Like I was talking with some Japanese person in the government. They said, India used the Japanese ODA for constructing the Delhi metro, but then you bought the Korean coaches. You see, this is short-term thinking. You see, this is jugaad thinking, which is not actually will work, because you see now he said, in the case of a mishap, will you pin responsibility on the Japanese or on the Koreans? Because the money is Japanese, the rails are Japanese, the construction is Japanese, but the train coaches are Korean. And India did not go for the Japanese coaches because they are higher on the higher side. They are priced higher. So you see, these short-term things, they impact a lot on the bilateral relationship. And so you see, this is short-term thinking. So again, as I said, but the Japanese, as I said, things are likely to improve with this ordinance signing, and clearly the pace has to improve now. And the fact that there were lots of issues between the state governments, because for example, Rajasthan previously had a Congress government, and Delhi there was a Congress-led government in power in Delhi. So now with the fact that Gujarat has a BJP government, Rajasthan has a BJP government, MP has a BJP government, Haryana also has a BJP government, Delhi is to go to elections later this year. So the fact that it's the same party which is running the state and the centre would also help, because this difference between the political parties between the state and the centre was also a big hampering the issue of industrialization. As regards to the intellectual and strategic depth on Japan is very minuscule, I must say. I must admit, it's very minuscule. Almost all Indians are experts on Pakistan. Everybody can talk on Pakistan and on cricket. And terrorism. These things, any Indian you pick up a conversation with, he can talk for hours altogether. But then, even in Japan, the expertise is very limited, and with the exception of the very few universities and the expertise. Like in Delhi and in and around, their expertise in Japan is lacking, which was not the case in the past. You see, Indian scholars regularly visited Japan. Rabindranath Tagore visited Japan. He was friends with Okakura Tenshin, the famous Japanese poet. There was a lot of interaction earlier, but this is not the case in the present times. Only recently interest in Japan has picked up again, but then it will be left. You cannot develop Japanese experts overnight, but it will be left. It will take time for India to grow up its expertise. So intellectual and strategic depth on Japan is definitely clearly lacking. Major thrust, majority of the people. If you see Indian media, also the Indian media is also, I think, too much bothered with what is happening in Pakistan. Frankly, the amount of space that they devote to, and now China is the new poster boy, because you see anything China does, it becomes news. Whether it does bad, it becomes news. Good, it becomes news. If it does something bad, it becomes even greater news. So whatever China does is news. Then yes, you're very right in saying that the nuclear deal, India should not put too much of emphasis on the nuclear deal. Yes, and as I said later on towards the end of the presentation, I think now the government realizes that too much of emphasis on the nuclear deal is not good, because there are other areas in which Japan and India need to collaborate. And the fact that now the Japan has agreed to invest $35 billion in other areas apart from the nuclear sector, it shows that both the countries realize there are other areas that they can work on. And as I said, yes, with ASEAN countries, yes, the relations have not, as opposed to say relations with Japan, which have been fast forwarded, the relations with ASEAN have not yet picked up. Partly, I think, due to, as I said, there is cross-party support for Japan-India improvement of relations in India, which may not be so clear in the case of India's relations with ASEAN. But I think the only country that Modi has visited, ASEAN country, after assuming Prime Ministership, is Myanmar, and that too, I think, was on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit. So I think he has to, but this is a key region which he should not ignore. I think. As opposed to that, Modi now has another challenger in Chandrababu Naidu. Chandrababu Naidu, after taking over as the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, his first visit was to Singapore, and the next destination that he went was to Japan. So I think Modi should learn from Chandrababu Naidu, because he is also trying to steal the wind, the thunder from what he says. So I think, and one key area maybe with Vietnam. Because during the same time as President Xi Jinping was in India, the Indian president was visiting Vietnam. So I think Singapore, Vietnam, and Indonesia, and the Prime Minister Modi should also make a visit to Indonesia, because this is one country which has been neglected by India in terms of its foreign policy outreach to Southeast Asia. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Then maybe I use my prerogative as the chair. Thank you. But as I said, very few people have. It's quite daunting to be able to speak across economics, geopolitics, and then diplomatic history, bilateral relations, because people catch you out. You know, if you concentrate on one, then you can cover yourself and say, "No, I'm not an economist, so don't ask me that question." But you did well, because you said, "I'm going to take everything on." I got one comment which actually comes from the questions that been asked before.
Yeah.
This civilian nuclear deal thing, I think your argument is it's rational, it's pragmatic, so it will happen. I urge you to think that a lot of things that are rational and pragmatic don't happen because, especially in democracies, national psyches are very hard to change. And with Japan, Hiroshima of course presents a major problem. And then what happened recently? So telling people something is rational is one. A good politician is the one who can convince people and carry them along. I don't share your enthusiasm in Japan, same as Sir down here, that whether he can carry them in the time period that you say. That's just one comment. Question is, two questions, quick ones. And I want to follow on what again was asked earlier, started with Rajiv and then Sir asked it. China has a vision, it's called the Maritime Silk Road. What is India's alternative vision? Does it have one? Sir talked about Sri Vijaya. They need to have a vision. They need to have a vision on the same scale as the Maritime Silk Road. Say, we're going to build here, we're going to do this, we're going to have infrastructure. What do you think is, it's an unfair question because you're not an ME official. But maybe if you got some thoughts on that. The third question is, you talked about the quadrilateral initiative. I think you're being slightly not very generous to India because I think the main problem there is Australia. Australia's issues vis-a-vis getting China angry are very prominent. The Australians have a very major dilemma. Their major trade economics is through China. But they are a treaty ally more or less of the US. They feel the threat, but yet they cannot openly say. And I think in the quadrilateral initiative, as much as it's very fashionable to always say that India is an elephant, India got cool feet, maybe I just wanted to hear your thought. Australia is a major problem there as well. So, on that.
Yes, thank you very much for your comment.
I was going to post that later on.
So, thanks Inder for your comments and the question. Yes, I think I totally agree with you that yes, this is very pragmatic and rationale for India to think of getting Japan to sign a civilian nuclear deal with India. But as I understand from my personal visits also, there is still a tent outside the Japanese Foreign Ministry, MOFA in Kasumi Gaseki, with anti-nuclear protesters. And I was there in December 2013. I was there recently in December 2014. The tent is still there. I should have put the slide. I always anti-nuclear. The tent is still there. So you see, yes, there's a strong public disenchantment with Japan's reliance on nuclear energy, and also any future Japanese decision to export nuclear technology to non-NPT countries. So what we see as rationale on the Indian side, of course I am speaking as an Indian, so I'm putting more emphasis. What we see as rationale on the Indian side can be very difficult for the Japanese to sell to the domestic audience. But as I said, maybe because Prime Minister Abe has a majority in the Diet, so this is maybe the right time that he could do it. But perhaps there would be opposition now from the Japan Communist Party to his deal. But if he wants, he can get it, and this is the right time to do it, because you don't know when there are elections in Japan. Japan changes its prime ministers more often than Indian batsmen get out in Australia. So even Shinzo Abe he called a snap elections, and he's the first Japanese prime minister to survive 2 years in office in a long time. Earlier have been just get in, get out kinds. So on the question of yes, India's vision is yes. I don't think India has a vision when it comes to initiatives like the Maritime Silk Road Initiative. We are a very reactive country. We only react when China does something, and then we think, oh, it's time to do something. But frankly speaking, I don't think India has an answer to such an initiative, the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, because what we are doing is very ad hoc. We are building up naval ties with Vietnam. We're trying to build up our ties with Myanmar. but then it is very ad hoc. It is not a part of a policy. It's not a part of a bigger vision. So frankly speaking, it is. I think something that India should be working at as soon as possible, because I think in the longer run, you see, there is the Chinese string of pearls, which has funded, in which China has funded the construction of ports in right from the Arabian Sea seafront in Gwadar in Pakistan. Then there are there's Hambantota in Sri Lanka, then Kyapyo in Myanmar, then Sittwe also in Myanmar, and Chittagong in Bangladesh. So there is a whole string of pearls that China has stitched up. But I think we are yet to see an Indian Mangal Sutra. That I would say. Mangal Sutra is a necklace that Indian married women take. I would call it the Indian Mangal Sutra, but we are yet to see it. It is not there. So India has been very reactive. One of the things it has been doing is trying to improve relations with, as I said, Vietnam. But that is again on an ad hoc basis. It is not a part of a strategy. Chinese, yes, the Chinese, they do have a strategy. And for example, in Mali, in Maldives, the Indian company called GMR had got a contract to build the international airport in the capital city of Mali, in Maldives. But then the contract was overturned at the last moment, and now the contract is with the Chinese company. And although GMR tried to take the Maldivian government to court, things did not happen. And now the Maldivian president is a new president, and India has lost a great deal of influence in Maldives. Similarly in Sri Lanka as well. Because recently in Sri Lanka also, Sri Lanka allowed the Chinese nuclear submarine to berth at the Sri Lankan port. So you see, the Chinese are working to a plan. India is very reactive, and there was a very popular TV series in India called The Flop Show by a comedian called Jaspal Bhatti. He was no more, he died in an accident. So he said, then the show, it was shown that, what do you do in a meeting? And the Jaspal Bhatti in the TV show would reply, we decide the date for the next meeting. So it is like something like that. So there is no, as Sindhu rightly said, there is no strategy, concerted strategy to take on this initiative like the Maritime Silk Initiative. And what is India doing is now very ad hoc, reacting in an ad hoc way. Quadrilateral initiative, yes, perhaps you are, yes, I think you're right in saying that, yes, Australia was more keen to get out of it than India, yes, I accept that. Maybe, I don't know whether it has got to do with the fact that Kevin Rudd speaks Mandarin, or, but the fact that, yes, Australia developed cold feet, and because Australia's biggest trading partner is China, and on the one hand they are on the one hand they are sandwiched between the United States and China, and they don't know what to choose, and they don't want to be in a situation where they have to choose. So they can only pray that Australia and China, Australia and the United States and China do not ever have an actual breakout of hostilities, because then I think they would be the biggest loser. So they have one feet in one camp and the other feet in other. But then, yes, of course, Australia was backed out, and then India also was not too keen on being seen as being openly annoying the Chinese dragon, so it fell through. But then again, as I said, what is something called the concept of democracies, or what Shinzo Abe calls it, the Asian strategic diamond. Maybe something like that could be stretched up again, which would involve other countries like Singapore and Australia, and Singapore and Indonesia, provided with their agreement, of course. So I think these are works in progress, and I think, as we can see, economics will dictate many things. For example, now energy diplomacy is another hallmark of the Modi diplomacy, because you see, Modi is looking aggressively courting countries which can supply India energy resources. Australia has coal, Australia has uranium, Australia has LNG, liquefied natural gas. So these are again the considerations that the Indian foreign policy makers will have in mind while improving relations with other countries. So maybe Indonesia is a prime target, because Indonesia has energy. So I think foreign policy is moving into other directions. But then this year, we would also have other problems with the withdrawal of Western forces from Afghanistan. There will be security issues on the north. and the relations with Pakistan are getting no better because you see there are there is exchanges of fire on the LOC. So I think Modi will have other problems to attend to during this year, so which will take up quite a bit of his attention. Yes.
Thank you, Rupert. In proper Singapore style, we finish just before we are supposed to finish. So first, let me just please thank Rupert in the customary fashion. Thank you very much. Now I'm left with the very enjoyable task of presenting Rupert with a small gift. These are two books by one of our colleagues, Associate Professor Rahul Mukherjee, who's also head of research here at ICES. So maybe you can read this on your way back home
Yes.
to India.
Yes.
Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you.